Genesis 1 is not an account of talking about all of the created things. It's just not. And if it's not an account of talking about all of the created things, then there's clearly time outside of that. Because when did God create the other created things? So, Drew, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks, man. Really appreciate the opportunity. Anytime that I have a chance to talk about the Lord and faith and what God is doing and what, the multifaceted way in which God is operating in our society and in our world, I'm looking forward to it. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, I'm a little curious. Can you just tell the people a little something about you? It seems like you're involved in ministry and involved in Christian activities in a variety of ways. Is that right?
Yeah, I feel like I've been for a while. Social media has been a great platform and a great ability to have a conversation with people. I have been doing stuff on social media for probably a decade or so. Used to do a page on Facebook when Facebook was fun, called The Dirty Christian. And it was the idea was getting, doing discipleship is dirty business. And it takes getting down into the dirt with people, talking about hard things, talking about cultural things that are important that other Christians are talking about. So started, probably I want to say about 2014. So yeah, probably about a decade. I started doing stuff like that. Really kind of from there, I was active duty Navy for 20 years. I retired in 2019. So I joined right out of high school at 19 years old in 1999. I did a full 20, actually about 20 and a half years there. I got saved when I was in the Navy. I was not a Christian when I joined. Actually, I would say I was very much a partaker in heathen and paganism quite a bit. I was a very worldly guy and cared very much about the world, and used to make fun of Christians, and started reading the Left Behind series while I was on a deployment, and I heard the gospel in the Left Behind series, and from there, the rest, 23 years later is history. I've been serving the Lord faithfully ever since. Let's see. Since I retired from the Navy, I moved out here to Missouri, where I am a youth pastor at a church called Summit Springs in Blue Springs, Missouri. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. And aside from that, I preach about once a month. I'm being discipled by our senior pastor, who's been in ministry for about 50 years. I'm also on the board of board of directors for Abolish Abortion Missouri, which is a Missouri group that currently has one bill in our Senate to abolish abortion completely, and have been working pretty regularly to convince our legislators to make abortion illegal, so that we can have equal protection for those that are preborn in our state.
Well, it sounds like you're involved in quite a few things. Yeah, you seem pretty busy. So,
I also homeschool my kids, and I have 3 at home now. My oldest is he's already married, and he's just turned 21 last week. I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 8-year-old still at home that I homeschool. And yeah, I'd say I stay pretty busy, looking at possibly running for some city council sort of role here in my town. Yeah, and maybe eventually have prospects for some sort of representative or senatorial position down the road.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's one thing I do appreciate about you is, your activity in the rest of the world, right? You're not just doing Christian ministry inside the 4 walls, so to speak, right? You're very actively involved. And I think that Well, that's something that's a big difference between some. Like, I've known several Christians, right? They seem to be the separatists, right? We want to be completely apart from the world. And
Yeah.
so they're less involved.
I have no political aspirations prior to my retirement. Honestly, I was going to be kind of that separatist guy. I think prior to COVID, really, I was really had the mindset of just, if at all possible, try to get along with one another, live peaceable, quiet lives, as Paul instructs. But COVID and those years from 2020 on, I think, helped to destroy a lot of the idols that I had in my life, and particularly the idols that I had in the government, the idols that I had in the military. I mean, especially coming from 20 years of Navy experience, that's all I knew, and I would have been I was very sold out to do whatever I was ordered to do, to go wherever I was told to go. So the medical establishment, the higher education establishment, it all felt like culminated to this final tipping point during the COVID years. And I would say from that point on, I realized that I can't just complain. I'm going to do everything that I can within my ability and with whatever the Lord leads me to affect change and honor God, glorify Him in our day-to-day lives, in our government as much as possible, particularly in pushing for godly standards in morality and in judgment and in justice in our society, electing godly leaders and all of that kind of, I'd say it all started to happen around 2020 for me. I would have, like I said, I would have just been happy kind of raising my family, enjoying my retirement, hanging out in Missouri, just going to church and having a good old time. But I feel like the Lord really inspired me to do a lot of the things that I've been doing. And ultimately I just trusted in Him. If anything that I'm doing is not of Him and it is for my own personal benefit, I pray that He strikes that down and prevents me from doing anything that would be detrimental to His kingdom. Yeah, you almost have to parse it out, right? Like I feel the same way, where there's a certain expectation and a certain dynamic for local church ministry, local body, fitting in and building up of the saints, encouragement, edification, all of those things that are very important. And I think they must be done at a local level. But at the same time, it's a whole different world online, and the social media sphere, it takes a certain kind of person, and it takes a certain kind of constitution to kind of put up with some of the stuff that, and I know that you've seen it. I've been in a couple of your spaces on Twitter. There are some folks that believe some pretty wild things, and they're pretty outspoken about those, and navigating those, I think that's a challenge, man. I mean, and it takes a special kind of person to do that.
Yes. So the internet is very difficult and challenging.
The internet is indeed, as we've seen behind the scenes here. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But there's so many more people on the internet now, and information is so incredibly abundant that, you don't just have to be an apologist in like one area nowadays. Nowadays it's like, oh, but what about this? And what about the church fathers? And what about, this legend that you've never heard of before?
Yes. Yes. Just like Saint Boniface. I had not heard of Boniface until I had gotten onto Twitter. So I will say it's pretty enlightening to, in light of all of the bad things or the craziness that you get online, I think that there is a lot of good too, because you get introduced to a lot of different kind of avenues of thinking and how other people. So I think that it's kind of humbling a little bit, where you're we all like echo chambers, right? But
Yes.
they're not often edifying. Yeah, because they don't challenge us enough. I think they just people just give you thumbs up all the time, and they don't challenge your views. So the internet's good for that.
It's kind of funny. It's almost like muscle confusion, right? It's the idea that like if you do the same exercises over and over and over again, sure,
Right.
you'll get stronger in those exercises, right? But when you do new exercises, your muscles are challenged in a completely new way, and it
Absolutely.
causes a little bit quicker and more immediate growth. I think actually one of the last spaces you and I were in was an interesting one. It was mostly Catholics and Orthodox, and
Yep.
then you and me as the representative Protestants.
Yep.
And yeah, I had been in several spaces with them, and me as well. I've learned so much more about Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism and what they think about a lot of things. But yeah, I wouldn't have probably had I
Right.
not been involved in some of these spaces,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's given me an appreciation. I think I feel like I used to be pretty rigid, and kind of like, no, what I believe is always right,
Yeah.
and I think that entering into some of these spaces have really challenged me to see things differently.
So let's see. So you're a youth pastor. You're
am.
you're currently a youth pastor, right?
Yes, sir.
I've got some questions for you.
Yeah, please.
So I want to know, well, how long have you been a youth pastor? Number one.
About 2 years.
Okay, so
I
you're
want to
pretty
say I'm
new.
going on about 2 years. Yeah, I'm
All right.
definitely new, man. This is not, a lot of youth pastors start earlier on in life, and they're like maybe their early 30s, late 20s,
Yeah.
early 30s, and I'm in my early 40s. So it's
Yeah.
definitely been a challenge.
Yeah. So what do you feel like is one of the biggest issues that challenges today's youth in the church?
Oh boy. Um, I mean, I don't know that it's any different than any other generation, but what I do
Okay.
think is social influence. Whatever society deems to be good or appropriate or right, a lot of the times you see kids kind of following the culture and adopting or adapting a lot of what the culture says is appropriate. And so I think the biggest challenge is, and like I said, I think it's all generations, but I think the biggest challenge is getting these kids to think outside of themselves and to think outside of where they've come up, how they've been raised. I think we all kind of take for granted the way that we were raised up and how our family operated, but there are kids. Every kid is growing up in a whole different environment, different from each other, and yet still trying to keep up with social influence, and social, trying to be part of the team, I guess, or, to fit in. And so, the biggest challenge for me as a youth pastor, I think, is recognizing the differences in kids growing up, that not everybody has the same background, and how to get them to think outside of what they see, because their view is very strained and limited, right? I mean, it's essentially their school, their family, and their friend group. That's their entire worldview, is those three things: school, family, and friend group. And so once you can break them out of seeing that as everything, and get them to see more perspectives, I think it opens them up to realize that the world's a lot bigger than them, and God is very important, and having a relationship with the Lord is the only thing that's going to get you through this chaotic life. So
Well, that's interesting. Do you not include the internet as a part of that?
um I think I would wrap the internet around culture and society specifically, because this generation that's the middle school to high school years of this current generation, the internet is just as much of their culture as their high school. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I would say most of, I was watching a kind of a funny video on Instagram the other day, but it was kind of like Zoomers and how they, Gen Alpha and Zoomers, and how they kind of interact. Um, And they don't call hanging out with their friend, they don't call like their friends, they call it their chat. Like they're all in Discord or in some sort of group chat together. So the internet is totally ingrained in their worldview.
Yeah, because to me, that's one of the major things that's totally changed now. Like it used to be, in a sense, like you had more control groups because it was family, friends, and to some degree, parents could kind of control who they hung out with, right? But today, everything seems so globalized. I'll give you an interesting example. I remember one time I was running a particular argument, okay, and I have a group of pretty good friends that are all pretty intelligent. And so I ended up running this argument against them, and I had like zero impact. And typically I was like, whoa, like I was just like, what happened? Like that made no sense to me, because typically at least some of them I would move a little bit, or, because like, all right, I knew that I knew most of them. Right. And so I knew that they were thinking, and I was like, but the new argument that I was presenting just wasn't changing anything. So finally, I had to kind of go back to the drawing board and go, wait a minute. What presuppositions am I assuming that maybe they don't have? And this was the one that I didn't account for. It was this. I went back and asked them, are you a citizen of the world first or a citizen of your country first? And as soon as they answered that question, I could go ahead and tell you exactly what they believed about some of these other issues. And my presupposition was, I didn't realize how many people considered themselves a citizen of the world first.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't think that I would consider that either.
Yeah, I would say probably several of them did. And that was the major difference as to why my argument didn't affect every single person who believed that they were a citizen of the world first were moved by my argument.
Interesting.
And that was,
well, I mean, that makes, and perhaps that's an interesting take that you bring up, because with the current debate towards Christian nationalism and what does that mean, and what is the appropriate ideology behind Christian nationalism, I could see that if your allegiance was to the world first versus your nation, that could really, really impact the way that you view God's call on your local, what local impact you could have.
Yeah. Well, and think about it this way, right? Let's just imagine you're talking about the issue of immigration or something like that, right? And you're like, no, we don't want to let them in for, security reasons, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm a citizen of the world and everybody is my brother and sister, how dare you keep my family outside of my house?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Why would you do that? Right? And it makes all too much sense. I mean, I would say that makes perfect sense. Why would you want to kick your own family out of your own house and not let them in?
So yeah, that's very fascinating, man. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. So I think it's very important to reevaluate a little bit, because you know what, with the internet, there is a massive change in globalization. I mean, for instance, today it's like, oh yeah. Like I've watched, players from StarCraft 2. Well, where are they? They're in South Korea, right? So I have some idea of what's going on in South Korea, right? I watched the documentary on Shogi and Go, right? So I'm watching the top South Korean players play, and what I've met other people from South Korea, like there's something I can share with them in common, even though they barely speak English.
Yeah.
And like I have some idea of what the Brazilians are doing in Brazil. Like politics is so much more global than it used to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you think about how moved we as a society have been over the recent election of Javier Milei, I think I'm saying that last name correct. I might not be. And also Bukele in El Salvador. I mean, those are significant world events that 10, 15 years ago, I don't think America would have paid attention to. I certainly know that most nations know who Donald Trump is.
Hmm.
Most nations probably know who Joe Biden is,
Yep.
good or bad. Uh, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's uh, that is a very real challenge, and definitely a presupposition that many people probably our age don't typically have.
Hmm.
But because of the internet and because of society at large, and being, intimately more involved in these other places, yeah, we may have to change our tactics a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, because you have to re-explain. Well, and think about as well, family, right? Let's take family, for example. What is family, right? And with so many other people, right? They're all growing up in broken homes. Family to them are those they connect with,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
if you're connecting with somebody more on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, then you're actually connecting with other human beings in person,
Yeah.
then that's your family, right? And they're in their mind, and not to mention, there's a lot of these aspects that I think that the older generation doesn't even understand. They struggle to understand and connect with some of these younger generations because you know um, talking about things in person. Okay, so for instance, actually, one of my last college classes, we had to read this book, and it was talking about church ministry, right? And it was talking about online church versus in-person church, and which is better? What should we do? Should we generate more online services? How does this work? And I totally think this is a major problem because a lot of people are going like, yes, you need in-person church. You need to come and fellowship with a body of believers, right?
Yeah.
But, and if I ask you, okay, Drew, is it better to fellowship in person with a body of believers, or is it equal to fellowship online?
Yeah,
What's your
that's a very good question. Prior to this discussion on kind of a global mindset, I think I would have for sure said in person has far more value. However, I think if you're really working through that, I would probably equate them more on the same level, with the younger generations in mind. I mean, I personally think that there's a lot of value in meeting with people face to face during the week. Um, for me, I there's something about seeing the person that I attend church with, being able to rely on them, meet with them during the week for prayer, for other events. Um, and like because I love discipleship, I really value face to face discipleship because uh, we can there's so much more to experience when you can take a person, their you know facial expressions, body language, like all of that, I think plays
Drew, what are you talking about? I'm talking with you right now. I can
oh
see your
yeah,
facial
no,
expressions.
for sure. But like Twitter is not really that way. Like a lot gets lost in translation if it's just text.
Mhm.
Or even Discord. I know that they have features, like video and stuff like that, but text only makes it I think it's very difficult to understand the intonation of people's words and body language and stuff. So I would always, I think I would, to answer your question, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long to do that. I
You're
think I
fine.
would value face to face, in person over online, but I don't think that it's non valuable either to do online stuff like that.
Is it more valuable? Is it actually, or is it just your opinion?
I think it's just my opinion. I think that there is something about, obviously, like the internet was not around when scripture was written. The only gatherings that they could do were online, were in person. And so, but because society has evolved in a way that was different from than it used to be, I think that there is value. But I think my preference would be face to face. But I don't know if I could make a solid uh, statement one way or the other.
So yes, I'm going to say it is absolutely better to meet in person. So, and I would like to make the argument this way. Now, I do think that unfortunately, the newer generation, they see no difference. And in fact, I would say that they would say it's the other way around. And I'll paint you a picture of this, right? Let's just imagine, and I know you've seen some people at church, Sunday morning, right? Sunday morning, you go to church, you listen to the pastor, you shake a few hands on the way out, you get in the car and you go to lunch, right? How many substantive conversations did you even have, right? And the answer can very easily be none, right?
Oh, sure.
And many people go to church on Sunday morning and have none, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Now I sit at home, I log in, I get the sermon, there's the sermon, and there's the chat box. And now all of a sudden I'm interacting with people. I'm talking about the message. I'm sharing Bible verses. I had a more substantive conversation, interaction online than I did in person. Nobody talked to me in person. We didn't even talk about the message.
Yeah.
Right. So I totally could see many people going like, online's not only even, it's better. I'm actually getting more interaction, more person. But I would suggest that online it's a lot like fake food, right? Like a lot of the stuff that we eat isn't actually substantive. You know what I mean? It's actually kind of pseudo substantive, right? And if you eat enough things that are pseudo substantive, it's kind of a little bit fake. Ultimately, in the long term, it'll cause damage and it'll cause harm.
Yeah.
Right. And there is something biological about actually meeting with somebody face to face that interacts with our body systems completely differently. Yeah. And is of greater benefit. And the same thing with physical contact, right? You need to have somebody that you can actually have connection with and contact with, because it does something else for you. And the same thing, like pastoral care. When something actually goes terribly wrong, you need somebody to actually physically be there for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
There's a really interesting movie. Oh man, what is it called? It's a French movie. Oh, I can't even remember the name of it right now. But it's about a man and a woman, right? She's a piano player and he's a game creator, like a board game creator. Like he literally invents them and creates them. And they are in apartments that are wall to wall, right? So they end up having this relationship where they just talk through the wall. And they think it's the greatest thing ever. Right? Yeah. Because they can just talk and, oh, this is great. They don't worry about what they look like. They don't, and they share, and they're routinely having conversations back and forth. And they just think it's great. But then of course, ultimately what happens, right?
They meet.
Well, before they do though, they run into the problems of only having a through the wall thing. And that's a few different things. One, there's no real consequence. If the other person just stops showing up, like that's it. It's over.
Yeah.
Right. And then number two, they're starting to run into that spot of like, hey, I want to be in contact with you. Like I want to see you. I want to touch you, And so anyway, I think it's a really interesting commentary, directly or indirectly, against merely only online dating.
Well, look at, I don't know if you've ever watched any of those shows like Love is Blind or Married at First Sight. Married at First Sight, maybe not so much, but the Love is Blind, the premise behind that is essentially you've got men sequestered away from women, and they only meet together to discuss, to get to know each other. And so they basically decide who they're going to marry prior to ever meeting face to face, never actually having any physical contact. And you bring up a valid point where during the dating phase, everything is hunky dory. Everything is great. They're expressing all of these various things, and they're even to the point, some of them expressing their own love for each other. They're like, oh man, I really love you. And then what happens is once they meet, they get married. Basically, the first time they meet, they're getting married. And then now they're being forced to act out what they've been talking about for the past month or whatever. And you find that the actions begin to speak louder than their own words. And so I think that is a very good case for the case that you are making, is that there is it's a pseudo social relationship. It is it can check some boxes for you. Particularly for guys like me. I'm a little bit introverted, man. Like I would prefer to just be at home. I like my family. I enjoy spending time around those people, but I don't often like enjoy spending time around other folks. But online, you're right. You can turn those friends off. You can log out and be like, I'm done for the day. I'm done socializing. And you don't really, for the accountability that you get as a Christian, you don't get that online. Because exactly like what you said, Adam, you can in online you can turn yourself off and just not show up, or through the walls. There's no obligation. But once you start meeting and you realize, oh, this person that I've been meeting with, they're not coming to church anymore. I haven't seen them. You can begin to there's I think a great pull to be accountable, to seek that person out, to be like, hey, are you okay? What's going on? How can I help you? So yeah, I'm gonna default. I'm definitely gonna agree with you on your stance, but you've given me a very substantive thing to think about concerning interacting with other folks too.
Yeah. So for my final project, it was actually terrible in some ways, because they had a specific bent that they wanted us to go. And, they basically framed all the questions like, oh, hey, how was the book right about this? I'm totally summing up, but that's pretty much what it was. And I was totally going like, no, I think the book is wrong. I think the book is flat out wrong. If you wanted me to write a letter to the writer, absolutely, sure. I just think that he's wrong. And one of the major things I thought about is like, okay, what's the solution? Because they're like, hey, what's the solution to all of, actually part of it was about COVID. Right? In light of what COVID brought, what's the solution to that? And of course, his solution was more online internet connectivity with people.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what I actually think people really want? Connection. The number of people that I know that went through depression, meaninglessness, struggling with intimacy. What do they really want? They actually want connection and family.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, look at the studies with the masks for kids in school that had their ability to learn hindered by their inability to see facial structure in conversation, and various emotions emoting from a face. Like those kids have been stunted, and the research has shown that is true. So yeah, I agree. Just wanted to add to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example, right? Because there are some things that you can't replace. It's okay sometimes when that's all you have, you got to kind of substitute. But you know what? There's another sense in which nothing can replace true and genuine connection, right?
Yeah.
And I really felt like, so what I argued for was like, what the church needs? The church needs to be the most loving, welcoming environment that everybody else is banging on the doors to get in.
Absolutely.
And if you actually have an environment like that,
yeah,
that's what everyone really wants. There was a church I remember growing up. It was called Sovereign Grace, and it was sort of a joke. It was sort of a joke because people would go there and then they would just disappear for a while. And why they disappear? Because they were so invested in their church. And I went and visited one time, and yes, dude, it was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome. I went there. I had like 2 or 3 decently long conversations with who? Oh, it wasn't the greeters at the door. It was just church members. And I'll never forget this one guy who was like, hey, nice to meet you. What's your name? Like, oh, here's my family. Here, come sit with us. And he just talked to me for 15, 20 minutes. He wasn't a greeter at the door. And then another guy as well. Like, they just talked and were welcoming. And, it was like you could feel the connection. They wanted you to be there.
Yeah.
Happy for you to be there.
Well, and I'm glad that you said that too, Adam, because as I kind of said, I wanted to do ministry for so long in my life, and I really hadn't been given the opportunity until this church. So I've had to learn at a later age in life more of the importance of those social interactions. In the Navy, you have the default position that you're all kind of on the same team. And so, these are the guys that you sleep with. These are the guys that you work with, you work out with. I mean, you PT with, it's all team building, everything. Everything is community and involvement. And my biggest struggle getting out and retiring after my entire young adult into my older adult life was in the military. It was very difficult for me to connect with non-military folks. Very hard to plug in. And part of it is just that my mentality was just very different. And I was used to, here's the things, like we would move every 3 years. Every 3 years, I'd have to go to another duty station. So what happens when you have a family that goes, that's having to bounce around so often is you get there and you have to fast track. It's like speed dating. You have to fast track your way into the church. So, we find a church within our first month of being in a new place. And then what are we doing? My wife and I we're trying to meet with as many people as possible, get plugged in as quickly as possible. By the time that you really start to become comfortable with the folks at the church, guess what? Now you're getting ready to process out to go to a new place. So it takes about 1.5 years to get somewhat familiar. That last 1.5 years, now you know that you're on your way out. You're going to be having to do it all over again. So I built into me, I built in this kind of defense mechanism of, Fight Club type relationships, like the single serving, everything is small, everything is quick, everything is like fun sized, travel sized, it's even your relationships are travel sized. You don't ever really get to put roots down. And so a big challenge for me has been, especially being on staff at this church and being part of something bigger, personal, face to face, is I have to get out of my own comfort zone to make it a point to find people that I've not met before. And thankfully we're in a small church. I think we max out at about 250 people. So it's a small church, which I love. I've been in mega churches. I don't like mega churches as much. I know why people like them, because you can get lost in the crowd. You don't have to connect with people at mega churches. You can just show up. But, so I've had to and my pastor, actually, part of his discipleship with me was, hey, you need to be more purposeful in introducing yourself, meeting people, putting yourself out there, getting out of your comfort zone. But what I found is, I have found that it actually has caused me to soften up and be far more empathetic and sympathetic to people that are going through things, because I'm putting myself out there. Because you can't really rely on other people to do it. Like you kind of have to do it when you know that that's what needs to be done. You can't expect other people to do it. You got to do it yourself.
Yep. No, you're right. You're right. And I definitely understand. My dad did 20 in the military, and I was that military family. So it's very difficult. And you kind of become a little bit more callous to it.
Yes.
Yeah. But and it's unfortunate. And it's like, hey, look, if you're in a military family, that's how it is sometimes, and you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, when you're stable and it's a very different thing. And either way, I think that one of the biggest things that people are looking for today more than ever before is connection. They're looking for genuine connection, and we're so full of artificial connection, I mean, today, especially with, hey, our phones and everything like that, right? Everything is small video games, social media, and you're getting a taste of every bit of false things that they're not completely satisfying.
Your example of fake meat or fake food, man, is perfect. Yep. I mean, it's almost the real thing. You go to Burger King, you order the Beyond Meat burger. It's like, it kind of tastes like a Whopper, but there's something just not as satisfying about it.
That's right. Yeah. So I've got another question for you. Here we go.
Yeah.
What is needed more? More Christian apologists or Christian influencers?
Oh boy, gosh. let's see. So I
You didn't know you were going to get all these questions. And you're
no,
like,
I
"Oh,
love it. I love it. I love thinking through stuff that I don't normally get challenged to think through. Um, Here's my argument for both.
okay, yep.
So on the Christian influencer side, so I am a Christian nationalist. I do believe I'm also post millennial. I know we probably will talk about that a little bit. Um, so I do see a grand purpose in God's kingdom, that more and more of our influencers, more and more of the people that have a voice in society should come with a Christian slant. They should come from a Christian worldview. I think that would be very beneficial for a lot of our culture to have known influencers. Like for example, if you look at the impact that guys like Jordan Peterson, now I'm not claiming that he's a Christian, but definitely more on the conservative side, more on the philosophical side, more on kind of like in touch with reality side, people really were drawn to him because he was speaking counter to society's narrative. And so in a lot of those cases, in the case of Christian influencers, I think that there is a need for more. I think we need more Christian YouTubers, more Christian filmmakers, more Christian talking heads. However, and there's going to be, just like there is with Christian nationalism, there's a lot of room for error, and there's a lot of room um, for arrogance to take its place, to be very demanding of people, to force convictions, to yoke someone unequally. I think that there's danger in that. So it has to be led by the Lord. It has to be very thoughtful and discerned. And so then on the other side of the apologists piece, I mean, I would almost argue that a lot of apologists are influencers. When I look at guys like Jeff Durbin, or I look at guys like Cliff and Stuart Knechtel, who do they do campus ministry where they will go and they'll start a conversation with a whole group of students standing around them, and they'll begin to debate, apologetic type conversations, really challenging people's worldviews. So in some ways, I think if I had to choose just one of what we need more of, I think apologists would be more, my current thinking right now would be apologists. However, I do see benefit in influencers, but if I had to choose one or the other, I would choose apologists, I believe.
See, you know what? I'm shifting on this one away from apologists.
Okay.
And here's the reason why. Let me give you my little case as to why. What has changed my mind is being in some of these spaces on Twitter, interacting with people on YouTube. And what I have found is that being involved in those places, the questions that I'm hearing are not super difficult. I would charge that the vast majority of my friends could answer them. There weren't, it's like, look, I have studied for many, many years. And if you wanted to talk about strong philosophical arguments, I've come prepared. But I would say that most of the time, the questions that I'm hearing from even younger Christians and stuff, they're not super challenging. And really, all they really needed was another Christian to be there, to be present during that conversation, and just be like, no, that literally goes against what Jesus said. No, this is literally antithetical. And again, it's just like, man, having more people present. Now, I don't mean that as a charge.
Can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off, but do you think that is based on the fact that we've lost a religious baseline in this country? Do you think that the reason that they just need simple answers now is because we're not even ready to get there at that apologetic level?
Rephrase your question, because what do you mean?
Yeah.
Do you mean, are you asking because it's the tearing down of our churches, or?
So I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 43. So, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, that's fine. But if you're close to me, then
I'm pretty close.
Okay. So I was raised, even though I wasn't raised a Christian, my family went to Catholic church. most of the people and most of my interactions growing up were people that were raised similar to me. So I could talk about Jesus. Most people would understand basic biblical stories like Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, possibly the creation story. Uh, the majority of people I'd interact with had a baseline of understanding what the Bible says and what it taught. However, what really opened my eyes was when I was in the Navy, probably about 12 or 13 years in. I was standing watch on the quarterdeck of the ship. So it's like a 12-hour watch where you stand out there and you basically check people's IDs, making sure that they're supposed to be there on the ship. I'm having a conversation with a young guy, probably about 10 years my junior. And I said something like, it's like that story in the Bible. And I think I talked about either Moses or Noah or something like that.
Yeah.
And he, and complete blank face, like I have no idea what you're referring to. And it was my first time realizing that a generation after me, or maybe just people living in different places than me, didn't have the same baseline. And so my question is, do you think that if the reason we need more influencers is because we've lost the baseline of general biblical information and knowledge, that the questions aren't difficult because they haven't even breached the surface on biblical truth?
I'm going to say it's a combination of, I'm going to take that one. So that is one major thing, right? Where I think that, the fundamental baseline of Christianity has completely changed, right? Like, yeah, absolutely, right? Well, and I will say, like, I remember talking to one young girl, this was many years ago, but she did not know who Jesus was in the United States, right?
Yeah.
And for most of us, we're like, how is that even possible? Like, right. I had to explain who it was, And so it's like, yeah. Okay, so you have that as a big piece, hands down, right? But the other thing is, I think it's the expansion of information. Now it's just a matter of, it's like, even if you did go to Sunday school, right? And I've seen this happen, well, unfortunately, with other people that I know as well, right? Yeah, cool. Grew up in church, heard all those stories, hit college, and the college professors just beat the religion right out of them, right?
Yeah.
Many of us have heard those types of stories. And now you don't even have to go to college to have the religion beat out of you. Oh, hey, Drew, what about Horus? No, what about Lilith? What about how Genesis has been changed? Didn't you know that all of that stuff has been changed and just made up over time and time again, right? And yeah, you're expected to know the answer to every single challenging question. Oh, don't you know that Christian is a pagan religion? And so is Easter, and so is this and that. And, so I think it's just a plurality of information, and you're bombarded with so much information that you're just left going like, I have no idea how to tell, how to discern what's true and what isn't.
Absolutely.
And that's even where, yeah, absolutely. Even for somebody who's decently familiar with the Bible, it's way more complicated. Just like we were talking about, now you're challenged from others who have the name of Christian behind them. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Eastern Orthodox, like, even the Lutherans are bringing together other views of the Bible. You're like, what? I've never even heard of
Catholics. The Catholics have been they've been jumping into apologetics, man. I got to say, I'm impressed to finally see Catholics getting off their butt and like trying to defend their faith. Cause that's not how I was raised. I couldn't have told you anything about, the Bible or making an argument growing up as a Catholic. God was a very distant being in my mind. That's what I was taught.
Yeah. But they're Catholic apologists, Islamic apologists, the Hebrew Israelites, the Hebrew Roots movement, right? And so I've had people asking me questions like, hey, look, so-and-so asked me this, like, what's the answer? Right. And some of the ones they've asked me are a little bit more complicated, and some of them aren't, and that's why I'm just saying, it's like, it makes a huge difference just to be present, right? Somebody's challenging you with a question, and then when your friend right next to you says like, oh, that's stupid, it makes a huge impact mentally, subconsciously.
Yeah, that's good.
So I just think like the more Christians are involved in the conversation, the more significant it is, right? It just makes a big impact. Well, and you know what else? So like, shout out to Pierce and the Street Epistemology folks. So I've talked with a bunch of these guys. Most of them are atheists. But some of the things that they brought to us, and me and some of my friends are giving answers, and they're just like, wow, I've never heard that before. And that's literally just where I'm thinking, you've never heard that before, you know? And even talking to a few other guys who are atheists, and they find it fascinating to talk with me sometimes because they're just like, yeah, never heard that answer before, never heard that explanation. Like, and they're giving me the questions that challenge them to leave their faith. And like, those questions have answers. It's
Right.
unfortunate that they didn't find them. And actually, I want to give one other further example because I was just talking with a friend the other day, and his friend was coming to him pretty much saying, I'm planning on leaving Christianity. Right. And he was like, all right, man, look, we got to have a conversation. Right. Because he didn't know that things were this bad. And he talked about his friend was bringing up all of these questions and all of these objections. And the fact was, he had asked other church members, other leaders and staff members of the church those questions, and they responded with, you just need to have more faith. You
Yeah,
just
that's
not
wild,
believing,
man.
you know? And he was, I'll be honest, my friend was upset. He was angry.
I'm upset for him.
Exactly. And that's exactly where it's like, okay, that's where you needed the apologist, right? You did need the apologist there, but yeah, shouldn't be afraid of questions.
No.
I'm going to assume a little bit about you. Okay. You know what they say about assumptions, how they're such a great idea.
Such a great idea.
Yeah,
you should definitely do that.
Is that, you know what, you are open to doctrinally different conversations Absolutely. About a variety of different things. This is not always popular in every circle.
No, it's not. And I would say in a majority of circles, it's not very popular. That's why they're circles.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. They don't look like the Olympics. So that's definitely where I poke the bear, maybe too much sometimes, but I can't help it. I'm addicted to truth. I'm very pro the Bible, number one. I'm very pro the truth. And sometimes I do feel like our traditions have gotten in the way of the truth. So I did get to see, so you have actually a whole bunch of posts and blog posts and all sorts of stuff. So you've been doing work for a little while. I'm very curious, and I heard you made it to the Ark, right?
I did. Yes.
What was that like? I haven't made it. I actually do kind of want to go at some point, but
yeah, I think it's totally worth going. You know, I love the
Unimbot.
Here's what I'll say is I love that there is a challenge to evolutionary biology. I do appreciate that there are people that want to visit a place like the Ark in order to kind of see, like, you know, because according to guys like Ken Ham that put the thing together, you know, it's built on the specifications of the Ark in the Bible. I do think that they take some liberties with, there's not a lot of detail given in scripture about the decoration. There's not a lot of detail given about like how they lived during the time. I mean, it's kind of, if you look at it, the story of Noah is very, very quick, kind of brushed over. And so they do take some liberties. They have some interesting, so, you know, when it comes to like dinosaurs, Ken Ham's view on dinosaurs is, you know, that the dinosaurs were around at the creation. I'm kind of more on the conspiracy side of dinosaurs.
Okay. You got to tell me, because I don't even know what that means. What does it mean to be on the conspiracy side of dinosaurs?
I'm not 100% convinced that the dinosaurs that we've been taught about in school exist.
Okay.
So what leads me to kind of conclude that is, no dinosaur bone that is displayed in any museum is an actual dinosaur bone. They are all created out of like plaster and various other like, I don't even know, just not bones. and they'll use the excuse that the most of the actual bones that they have are locked away because they're irradiated. I think that's the right word, irradiated, where they're full of radiation. And so what most from what I understand, most museums will say, no, those dinosaur bones on display are just fabrications of the bones that we have in our actual archives, which you can't touch because they are full of radiation. So that gives me a little bit of pause, and particularly, I'm in my 40 years. I think we've come around to the argument now that dinosaurs are more related to chickens than to lizards. But when I was growing up, they were more related to lizards. So there's some questionability there in their biology. And then let's see. And I think the other argument that I've heard that is at least interesting is that the very first discoverers of dinosaur bones were some hucksters, some people that were making up, that, oh, we found this thing, and they've never found a complete set of dinosaur bones. And so I don't know. I'll say all that to say about the Ark. I do think that their piece on trying to get dinosaurs involved in Noah's experience may be a little bit of a stretch. I wasn't there, so I don't know. It could be, I could be wrong, and I'm okay with being wrong. But if we want Christians to be, if we want our worldview to be taken serious, I think we have to answer some of these questions and some of these objections to creation. And I know, you and I talked a little bit before the show about creation, and so I think do we have a little different view on creation?
I don't know. I'm actually interested to find out. I do believe that God created, so that's a good start.
I do too.
So, but that was my next question. Actually, was going to be, so are you a young Earth creationist? Do you take the title? Did you get the brand? Did they tattoo you when you went to the Ark?
Oh, yeah. Ken Ham was out doing tattoos on his own. Tattooing all these guys with young Earth little dinosaur tattoos. Yeah, I would say that I still lean towards young Earth creation.
Great. How much time do we got left? I can deconvert. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. No, I'm not. Here's the thing: is I'm not actually opposed to old Earth creation and oh gosh, what is the right term that I'm looking for when it comes to evolution? But
theistic evolution.
Theistic evolution, yeah. I'm not opposed to that. In fact, I've heard some arguments. I don't know if you know Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. Yes. So he actually, his series on Genesis convinced me at least that there is plausible reason to view the Earth as older than the young Earth creationists would. Mm-hmm. So I'm not opposed to that at all. I think it kind of answers the question of nations. It answers the problem of when Seth leaves
Cain,
his family. Was that?
Did you mean Cain or?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, Cain. So yeah, you're right. Yeah. So when Cain goes and he goes off, to be with the other nations, I do think it answers some of those questions. But I think at the end of the day, we both agree that God created, God did it, and the amount of time that it took for him to do it to get to where we are, to me, is irrelevant to the gospel. It doesn't change the gospel message. It maybe just.
That's because I don't think listening to Ken Ham enough.
Yes. So am I kind of? Is that kind of where you're at? Like, what are your thoughts?
I am firmly agnostic on the issue of the age of the earth. I think that the Bible. I actually think the Bible is fairly clear that it does not teach an age of the earth. That's what I think. So now that is stronger than saying I don't know.
Right.
I am saying that the Bible does not. It doesn't say. It doesn't bring a clear beginning of things. And so let me give you at least one or two little propositions, right? And actually, I was just arguing with some people on Twitter about this. And of course, they're hitting me with all the classical stuff. But the first one that I would like to propose, and I come to find that people kind of have varying degrees, like different arguments work differently on people. But
Yeah.
this one I think is I think very strong. But it would be this: Genesis 1 is not an account of talking about all of the created things. It's just not. And if it's not an account of talking about all of the created things, then there's clearly time outside of that. Because when did God create the other created things? Some other time. That's the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
If you do not have a clear showing of this is when everything begins, all of time begins, then it doesn't really matter what the genealogies look like, right?
Yeah.
It's like, cool, you can count genealogies all you want. You don't have a beginning. If you don't have a beginning, you don't know when the beginning is. So
You just have a beginning to Adam. You don't have a beginning to everything else.
yeah. So like, for instance, one of the guys on Twitter, Steve, he's like, I'm a young humanist. Or he just saying like, he believes that he's like, yeah, from Adam to then is young. And I think that that's much more respectable. Like you can talk about like, yeah, Adam to now, like, okay, there's that position, right? But he's like, on the age of the earth, okay, that's more open, right? So my first question to most young earth creationists is the question of, cool, so when did God create the angels? And their answer is, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You don't know. Why? Because the Bible doesn't say. It explicitly does not say.
Right.
And so if it doesn't say when God created the angels, then you don't know when time begins. Now, a couple people, of course, they're like, well, the angels were created outside of time. I'll be honest and blunt and just say, I think this is absolutely incoherent and makes no sense.
Well, there's nothing to solidify. There's no basis on which to make that assumption.
Yeah. I just think that it doesn't work.
I agree.
So therefore, I think that's a very solid, very strong reason to say that. And then, of course, I think, Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2, I think it shows Genesis 1 follows a pattern, right? And most young earth creationists will be like, we'll see the pattern. And God said there was evening and morning, right? And God said, let there be light, and then goes through the whole thing, and there's evening and morning. Cool. But why doesn't the first day follow that pattern?
Right. I see the argument for Genesis 1 and 2 to be more of a God assigning function versus ex nihilo creation.
Although
I still believe in ex nihilo, like something out of nothing, but in the sense of time, no, I don't see that there's any definitive timeline to even relate to.
Yep, exactly. So that's where I would be on that issue.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I like that. I like that stance. I like the idea of being more purposefully agnostic, where it's not a just I don't know, but it's like I don't know that anybody can know about that, because the scripture does, like, sure, yes, you can take a timeline of all of these genealogies and you can trace that back to a certain finite point, but outside of that, I mean, you really have to I think science, I think observable science and creationism can coexist very easily. I don't see the problem for many, but just like people that argue that the KJV is the only valid Bible out there, it's like, if you're going to take such a hard stance on that, dude, I'm probably not going to convince you otherwise, so
well, one of my biggest things is just that I want young earth creationists at a minimum to be well educated on the subject, and to me my experience is that they're not. And the one thing that I don't like about the framing of the question, young earth creationism versus old earth creationism, is that does not tell me what it is your view is on Genesis 1. Now, if you're a young earth creationist, okay, I probably have an idea of what you mean, right? But if you're an old earth creationist, I have no idea, right? It could be a variety of things. It could be a day-age theory. It could be a gap theory. It could be all sorts of views, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've met people with all of those views. I've interacted with many of them. 20 years ago, I would have probably had more of a hard stance of like, no, you have to believe the Earth is this age. But I'm not there anymore. To me, it's not a primary issue.
Yeah. So the other one that kind of is not exactly identical to this, but I was very curious about, is I saw you did a couple episodes on Michael Heiser.
I love Michael Heiser. I genuinely love Michael Heiser. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I was very curious. What was your conclusion on Michael Heiser? But it sounds like I have a pretty good
Yeah.
idea now.
Yeah. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not. I'm more familiar with Heiser's uh, Genesis 6 take, Angels and Demons, than I am on any of his other doctrine that he's taught or believes.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't really probably be able to give you a good feel for what he's taught on those other things. But when it comes to Unseen Realm, was a book that was very eye-opening for me. It at a minimum, it just presented God's plan for history is so much bigger than what my brain allowed it to be. And so, and you know, and he's thrown some little nuggets out there that at least trying to address some of the things that a lot of people feel very like afraid to address from the pulpit. You know, so when it comes to the Nephilim, I would definitely I would not take a Sethite view. I would take a, sons of God, daughters of man, intermingling of species type of view on that incident that took place. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of what I've read from Heiser so far. So, anything that I haven't, I don't know. There may be some stuff that he's taught that is not totally good, but I haven't heard any of it yet.
Yeah, no, and I mean, yeah, he's definitely impacted me as well on that one. And I was actually just defending and arguing with somebody about that recently, largely because we were arguing actually about First Peter and Jude, right?
Yep.
And to me, man, once you look at First Peter, Jude, and I think there's one verse in Hebrews, they seem very resonant with that kind of understanding of Genesis 6. And it's just like, yeah, man, if it was just Genesis 6 with no supporting evidence from the New Testament, I very much feel like a Sethite view and some of these other alternatives would seem much more reasonable. But actually, the other major thing to me, I'm actually curious what you think about this, but it has to do with demons.
Yeah.
And basically, I've argued that it's like, I take Michael Heiser's view because it's the only explanation for demons that I'm aware of in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh. So, let's walk through this. So, demons. This has been probably the harder part for me to grasp. So, if I'm misrepresenting it, please let me know.
Don't worry.
Demons are the unembodied souls of the product of the Nephilim.
Yep.
Okay. So I always sometimes I feel like I twist that sometimes. So I try to make sure I'm saying it correctly. So the idea is that after God had destroyed the children of the Nephilim being really what Enoch would say are the watchers, or those that are in some sort of hierarchical position of authority that God had given them at one point. These created beings,
yeah, the children of the angels sort of notion.
Yeah, the children of the angels, and so the demons that we know of today, and particularly in the Gospels, are the souls that have been disembodied after they were destroyed, that were not cast into Sheol, because Sheol is particularly for the souls of humanity, or it was prior to Jesus's taking the captives to be with him. But yeah, Sheol was reserved for humans. These disembodied souls are now what we would consider to be demons. They are malevolent. They are not for our benefit. Just like the one in the Gessarenes said, who are you, son of man? Are you here to torment me before the time? It's like they're aware of their position, and they know that they will be destroyed, and yet they're not in a place where where they cannot wreak havoc on society.
So I'm totally with you, but then you said one thing
Yeah,
interesting.
what was it? Yeah.
Jesus taking the captives.
Yeah. So
What are you appealing to there?
so you're gonna have to forgive me of what verse it's in, but
Just give me a rough by approximation.
Yeah. Well, in one of the epistles, it's talking about Christ. What does it mean that he would ascend if he didn't descend and then led captivity captive? I'd have to, if I Googled it, I could find the verse for you.
Here, you try and Google that for a minute, because I mean, are you referring to some other passage besides the one in Peter where it's talking about Christ who descended down to speak with the spirits who are now in prison? Or that's the one?
That's the one I'm thinking about. So I may be giving you the wrong verse that I'm thinking of.
Well, so I'm curious, like, I want you to find the specific verse, because this is not gonna work if to talk about hypothetical verses that don't exist, or
right.
Because we should believe 100% of the things that God did say, and none of the things God didn't say. But yeah, so there's the one verse that refers to Christ who descended down into the darkness, right, to proclaim or speak to the spirits who are now in prison.
Ephesians 4:9.
Okay. So you're talking about some different verse.
So in saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower regions, the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And let's see.
Yes, that means he died.
And then he who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might find all or fill all things. And then it goes into the gifts.
Yes.
So,
and I don't think he's talking about taking any captives.
Yeah, I'm probably confused. But the one that you mentioned in Peter is probably more where my brain was going. But anyway, continue. What are your what's your take on that?
I'm poking at that a little bit because I was doing a bunch of research, and I haven't really come to 100% sound conclusion one way or another, but I was doing a bunch of research on the matter of soul sleep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so the question about what happens when you die?
Yeah.
And so let's say the Peter verse. Well, to me, the Peter verse where it's talking about Christ descending down into the depths to speak to the spirits who are now in prison from the times of Noah, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then, I think that is referring to the angels. It's referring to the fallen watchers. That Christ is basically going down and he's proclaiming victory. That, hey, guys,
yes, I would agree with that.
Guess what, guys? This is victory. I'm about to win the ball game right here. And you're never going to win now,
Right.
But I think that is confused, I guess, sometimes with other human persons or souls.
Well, I definitely would want to do more on that, particularly to solidify my stance. My overall view has been that Sheol itself was a resting place for disembodied human souls. It was separated by a chasm. As seen in the parable of Abraham's bosom, I think that is symbolic, or at least I would have said it was symbolic to Jesus referring to Sheol and the divide between where the souls were. But I've always kind of looked at it as, or understood it, that Jesus went down into Sheol and rescued those that were on the righteous side of Sheol to be with him prior to or post death, burial, and resurrection. So I'm absolutely willing to hear other thoughts on that or challenges to that, because I don't think I know enough about it. That's just always been in my head about how it went.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. It's not. I don't necessarily think that it's a subject of tremendous theological significance. Like, in other words, I don't think that it matters as much. So, and like I said, I haven't really, I don't know, I'm hesitant to argue about it, but I'm going to put it this way, right? So this is a question that's bothered me for a long time. And I remember one time in university asking one of my college professors, because he was a Pauline expert, did his dissertation, PhD dissertation on Paul, does all this stuff on Paul. And so after class one time, I'm like, hey, so on this question about what happens when you die, is it to the resurrection? We all wait for the resurrection, or do you instantly go to heaven? And he just instantly punched it on the question. He's like, yeah, I don't know. Like, oh, okay, great. And it's always bothered me. And I've almost been like, okay, look, I just want to debate somebody on this topic, not because I want to prove to be correct, but because I want the most accurate. Like, let's clash a little bit. Somebody fight with me on this. And so let's put out a suggestion, right? Okay, why was Abraham's bosom even mentioned as a thing? It's because all who are dead were what? In Abraham. What's the point of that? It's covenantal language. It's just a matter of all who are dead are under the covenant of Abraham, are in Abraham.
Okay.
All who are dead now are in Christ. Like, the covenantal language isn't really any different, actually, in this case. And so what it means to be in the covenant of Christ is that you will be resurrected. You will live again. You will rise from the dead. Then that's the significant portion. And so I think that the major thing that really has stuck out to me overall is that the New Testament is always focused on resurrection. That's what Paul's focused on. And when they're asking him, like, Paul's like, hey, don't be worried about those who have fallen asleep.
Right.
For don't you know, basically, what does he encourage them? He doesn't say, we'll see them in heaven. He says, no, for we will all rise again, right? Mm-hmm. The dead in Christ will rise first.
Right.
And then we will join them in the clouds. Right. And I'm just like, why did Paul encourage everybody that we'll see them, the encouragement is we'll see them in the resurrection.
Right.
We'll see them in the resurrection. Not we'll see them in heaven. And I just don't really think this encouragement is there really anywhere in the New Testament. Like, don't worry, guys. I'll see you in heaven.
Right. Yeah. So when the verse, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord, where does that fit into that viewpoint?
Yeah. So I didn't come have to bring all this stuff, but
oh no, I'm not prepared either, dude. I'm just literally spitballing questions.
Well, so part of the struggle is there are a couple different things. One is to make sure that, of course, we're looking at it and translating everything correctly. But number two is that Paul also seems like he's kind of framing a hypothetical. He's like, hey, look, you know what? If I die, I'll be in Christ.
Right.
But all the more that I should live, right?
Right.
Or I should continue on with his work. And I don't really think that Paul is overall framing this idea of, hey, look, oh yeah. Like, I'm going to have some sort of unembodied primary experience, and that this is what this is all meant towards. Yeah. Because part of the other major thing is that both Jesus and Paul, right, they're the primary two that have anything to say on this, and where everyone gets this idea that there's an unembodied experience, right? But they also talk about resurrection, right? And not only that, resurrection is the primary understanding from the Old Testament. So the major question is, were Jesus and Paul preaching and teaching something different from the Old Testament?
Right.
Right? And so, for instance, when Martha is there with Jesus and he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead, what does Martha say? It's like, oh, but Lord, I know that I'll see him again in the resurrection.
Yeah. Jesus
doesn't really correct her.
Right.
Correct. He's like, yeah. Hey, this is all cool. We'll be fine.
Yeah. There's another verse about a great cloud of witnesses.
It's Hebrews 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one is a really interesting verse. Because honestly, I've also poked around and asked people, if you don't know, this is a verse that is used for Catholics as to
Oh
why we
yeah.
should.
No, 100%. I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
So here's my major question, and I don't really have a solid answer. I've asked several people, I've asked people that are really good at grammar. Okay, is the verse referring to the Old Testament saints that it just went through a list of, or is the verse referring to the church members that surround us now?
Yeah.
And nobody has been able to answer that question for me.
What difference would it make if it was the Old Testament saints versus the ones now?
Well, their point is that the Old Testament saints are alive and looking down on us from
Right.
heaven.
Right.
That's their understanding.
Right. But if the soul sleep argument is true, then there would be no one until the resurrection that would be able to witness this, right? Is that
Essentially.
yeah? Except for maybe like Enoch and Elijah, right? I mean, because they didn't die, so they're somewhere with the Lord. So I guess yeah, my question for those that obviously I know that is the Catholic argument, and so I appreciate at least that they use Scripture to try to build that doctrine. At least in some part, like, okay, I get it. I hear why you pray to Mary and stuff like that. I don't agree, but I hear you.
Mhm.
And so, because if it's just the Old Testament saints that are watching, then there seems to be that there's a separate, like a separate holding place or waiting place, or that
Well,
they were right.
they would probably suggest that it's all saints, but those are the ones that are mentioned.
Right. Yeah.
So, but to me, again, I just think that it's very possible that what the writer of Hebrews is referring to is those who are around us now. You
Yeah.
know, therefore, since we
Yeah.
also have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, those of
Right.
us who are here now, witnessing what our persecution, witnessing our
Yeah.
struggle, witnessing as we are martyred, and because that's what the rest of the chapter is kind of going through. It's like, hey, look, here are the Old Testament saints. These are all of the incredible things they did in submission and obedience to God, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, hey, guess what? Now what's going on? Now we are persecuted. And then he puts this whole dialogue of how we are disciplined by God, right? And so that we may be continually be sanctified, right? Which
Yeah.
is reference to their sufferings currently. So,
Yeah.
so
The language cloud is interesting. Maybe that's where people get hung up on with the idea of cloud, and because you've got the Old Testament language of God coming on a cloud. You have not only in Revelation at the end, but you also have I believe that there's a reference to him before the plagues of Egypt came, that the Lord came on a cloud in
Mhm.
Exodus, and so you have that heavenly language, and so maybe people misunderstand or just misassume that the cloud of witnesses is particularly a heavenly group versus just a generic, the people around you are your witnesses. Yeah, I don't know, man. That's interesting. I mean, that certainly
Yeah.
is. I don't have a very good solid take, but I will say, going back to the original topic of conversation, is that I've always just kind of pictured it that way, where the saints prior to Christ's resurrection,
Mhm.
the saints all were in the same place, just separated and divided by a chasm, which we know is Sheol. The saints that the believing people went to be with the Lord at his resurrection, and those that were not in Christ, who were not in God's family, remain in Sheol until the end. But I don't know, man.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so in that case, right, it would be that the righteous are rewarded,
Right.
while so basically you would say then that the unrighteous are in soul sleep in that version that you articulated.
I mean, is soul sleep I've heard of it a little bit. I haven't studied it enough. Is soul sleep the idea that it's like no consciousness, or that you're conscious just outside of your body?
There are a couple different ways you could look at it. For most proponents, it would be the idea of non-consciousness.
Okay.
So that basically everybody would wake up at the resurrection, right? But I will say, like, of course, one could articulate a view that basically it's like you're in a dream state.
Yeah.
Right. What does sleep entail? Right. Even when we sleep now, it doesn't mean that we are technically unconscious. Right. So either one of those, I think, are both possibilities and stuff. So definitely some people are very strongly opposed to the idea of soul sleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's my commitment to truth that gets me into trouble.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, dude, is I'm not opposed to soul sleep. I think if scripture, if someone can paint it for me scripturally, I'm not opposed to any argument that can be founded in scripture. And there are lots of things that I haven't explored and don't know. And so I am very willing, if you can, I mean, because again, like when it comes to my theology, I hold to Reformed doctrine now. I did not come up as a Calvinist. It took me about 15 years to arrive there in my soteriology. And so, knowing that I had a blind spot then makes me think that I probably still have lots of blind spots. And then the Lord is part of the sanctification process is getting to know more and discovering more.
Well, I'll give you an example that to me kind of stands out to me. It's the issue that, okay, when I look across a lot of the stuff, I can see a lot of very strong verses for resurrection. And there are just a few very bizarre, odd verses for the idea of an unembodied state in heaven.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's where I'm kind of going like, is it more so the idea that we misunderstood these verses as opposed to all the other verses that seem to be talking about resurrection? And to give you like one philosophical argument that I think is interesting at a minimum, it would be this. So most people think that as soon as you die, the wicked go to hell and the righteous go to heaven. Okay.
Right.
Okay, cool. So do they go there without any judgment at all? Right. Does God explain what happened? It seems that the great white throne judgment takes place at the end of the age when all will be judged according to their own deeds.
Yep.
So then why are the wicked punished with no due process? Is it really righteous at all for God to punish the wicked and reward the righteous with zero due process?
Yeah, I think the Sheol argument, even outside of the soul sleep, still answers that question, is that they're in this essentially this waiting place, awaiting the final judgment. So and that could be a state of sleep. I'm not opposed to that. Honestly, I would kind of prefer that, right? I would prefer that when I close my eyes here, that when I do finally open them up again, it is at the judgment seat, and it is entering into going through the fire and then entering into the graces of the Lord and the New Jerusalem, the new heavens and new earth. So that would be preferable to me. I don't want to die and go somewhere where I'm waiting for some indeterminate amount of time. I think that is a grace and a mercy if that's the way that the Lord would do it. So I'd be totally on board with that. But again, I don't know that the scripture teaches that clearly enough for me to have a very solid kind of take on it. But I'm excited to explore this with you, Adam, as I follow you over the course of the, however many years, to see where you land on this with your solidified, doctrine, because, I'm all about it, dude. Like, I love the truth, just like you. I desperately desire, I don't want to be wrong about God. I acknowledge that I can't always be right about everything, but when it comes to the things of the Lord, like there are things that I know are true. Jesus is king. Jesus walked the earth 2,000-ish years ago, died on the cross, is God in the flesh. Those things I have no problem giving objective statements about. Everything else scripturally, I find to be fascinating and subjective if the Bible does not clearly teach on them like it does with the nature and character of Christ.
Yep. Well, hey, this has been a really great conversation.
We got to do this again, dude. This is this is the trailer of it.
Well, there's always so much to talk about,
yeah,
so and whatnot. But hey, I'll be happy to fill in your links. Where can people learn and find more about you?
Sure. I do have a podcast that is not as well maintained as it used to be. It is called The Doctrines of Rad. It's on YouTube. We have, I want to say, around 50-ish episodes that have been put out. My podcasting partner, Logan, and I have, we've had interviews with guys like T. Russell Hunter from Abolitionist Rising, Davis Yachts, who is a Christian lawyer who defended some of the Navy SEALs against the Biden administration. Let's see, Pastor Michael Clary. I've had, I've had Chase Davis, Andrew Isker. So some very interesting people that are doing things in the kingdom. I mean, that's ultimately what our podcast is about, is engaging with other people that are engaging in God's kingdom in whatever fashion that may be. I've had a Christian rapper, I've had a Christian influencer that was very popular on TikTok come on. So lots of those type of folks. So The Doctrines of Rad on YouTube. That is also my Twitter handle. It was originally going to be kind of a podcast focused Twitter account, and I basically just adopted it into my own personal account. So The Doctrines of Rad, at Doctrines of Rad on Twitter. I am on Instagram. Don't really post as much there, really just kind of scroll stuff. And then honestly, Facebook, I'm there, but more for family. So I wouldn't even try to find me on Facebook. Not even really worth it anymore.
Yeah. Well, hey man.
Oh, and Substack. Sorry, I do write. One last thing. Yeah, my Substack. That's where I would love to push most people, because I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker. And so if I can really clearly lay out some of my thoughts on my Substack. So if you go to Substack and just type my name, Drew Kaler, you should be able to find it pretty easily.
There you go. Well, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.